4 to 5 years ago, I built a game engine called Code Collision. And Code Collision isn't for gamers specifically, it's more for coders, where the idea is instead of focusing on building elements of the game, you're going to build the actual AI strategy. So you own a team and you have to figure out what's the strategy that you're going to express in code so that your players will beat out any other strategy. Now we're in this world of AI, where AI is writing lots of paragraphs of text, it's generating all kinds of crazy images, and it can also write code. And the neat thing about when AI tackles a coding problem is it can do it really, really well, but when you're building a strategy for a game, it's so dynamic and it can be pretty ambiguous. And it made me wonder, how would the different models approach such an open and ambiguous space? Especially like a game like soccer, it's a pretty straightforward game, but there's so many different ways that you can approach it. Do you want to be more aggressive? Do you want to be more tactical? Do you want to be defensive? And so I took this challenge to 3 different models, to Claude, to GPT, and to Gemini. And I was very, very careful with what I gave it in terms of instructions. I told each model that they're going to play a game. I told them how the game works, the engine, what it expects in terms of an input and an output, and it was going to be for the model to determine what's the best strategy. The thing I'm going to say before you watch each game is don't be looking for the winning strategy. I mean, that's definitely an element of it, but the part that I think is more interesting is which one actually shows a strategy that makes sense. At every step of the game, is that the type of move that you would do? Or does it have players that are just kind of wandering around aimlessly?
Let's get started with Claude against Gemini. I'm using Claude Sonnet 4.5 and Gemini 3, and later you'll see GPT 5.1 Codex. The V3 that you're seeing at the end of the name, that's just representing the fact that this is the 3rd iteration as they each developed their own strategies. So they had a V1, and then they were able to refine it and refine it once more. The Claude's in red, Gemini's in blue. Overall, I'd say that Claude has the stronger strategy. It's assigned 3 different positions for its players, one that hovers in the back, another that is a midfielder, and then the striker. Gemini, on the other hand, it seems to be going back and forth between going for the ball or otherwise defending and always returning to the corners of the field. I think it was confused about where the actual net was, and so it was not always quite oriented properly. Now you'll notice that Claude's goalie doesn't go for the ball. Even when it's in a good position to hit the ball, it'll instead prefer to stay in that same position and let others move the ball around. And that strategy doesn't work well for Claude all the time. Claude makes a bit of a mistake here. And you'll see here that Gemini is actually in a good position to get the goal, and it gets the goal. So we reset, Gemini's ahead by 1, moves the ball forward, and Claude is in an awkward position but manages to avoid scoring on itself. And again, you see that Gemini will do certain weird things like moving up away from the ball, which I'm not quite sure why it did that, but it works out well for Gemini because now they're ahead 2 because Claude scored on themselves. And with only a few seconds left, I don't think Claude can come back from this. Gemini takes the win. Unfortunately for Claude, it was due to an own goal, despite the fact that I think throughout the game it had a more cohesive strategy. Now let's go to GPT against Claude. This time Claude is in blue and GPT is red. Now GPT is playing a similar strategy to Gemini's. It prefers to go to the wings a lot, and it has a player in the back that I don't think they quite know where they're going. They're probably confused about where the net is. But when the ball is close enough, GPT does go for it. You'll see that Claude has a good position with the ball and actually manages to get a goal. But GPT does something interesting, which is that it's not always going directly for the ball. It is going at a slight angle, so it knocks the ball in the direction that it wants it to go in and manages to actually move the ball forward that way. But Claude is pretty good at playing defensively and luckily avoids a goal as the ball rolls right in front of the net. And this is where I think GPT's strategy is actually pretty promising here in terms of how it can move the ball around. And here we see Claude trying to move the ball forward once more, still pretty tactically strong, though it does make some choices that I don't necessarily follow. GPT could have had a goal, but the fact that it always goes at a slight angle means that it misses. And so Claude wins 1-0. It was a deserved goal, but GPT could have scored a goal a couple of times. And so lastly, we'll see GPT still in red against Gemini. Now I'll note that these are still the same strategies, so we can expect what we've already seen from the last games, but let's see how this plays out when we have a couple of players that are confused about where the nets are and which directions they should be going in. You can see that GPT is pretty good about going towards the ball, moving it forward and keeping it in Gemini's half, while Gemini is struggling to get the ball moving forward and tends to just go directly for the ball. And GPT is pretty close to getting some opportunities here, but can't quite get the angle right. Now what's neat here is the ball's moved back to GPT's half, but because of the way that GPT is able to get behind the ball and move it back forward, it quickly gets it back onto Gemini's half. And then on occasion, Gemini is actually positioned well with the ball, I think more through randomness than anything else. And here we see that Gemini has almost got a breakaway, and unfortunately GPT scores on itself with a couple of unlucky bounces. And so we reset, and again now we see that Gemini is still kind of confused about where to go, but luckily avoids scoring on themselves. And GPT sort of adjusted strategy slightly, where now it seems like one player's going for the ball and the other isn't. Gemini wins, mostly out of luck, but it still wins. Now I don't want to ruin a fun experiment by being overly analytical about it. This wasn't meant to be a statement about the quality of any of these LLMs and their ability to write code, purely just an exploration about how each of the LLMs navigate building a strategy for a new and rather ambiguous space based on their respective knowledge bases. I spent some time dissecting each of their approaches and understanding the way that they form a narrative around their goals and refining that narrative as they review the log files to then iterate their solutions. It was really fascinating and something I'll share more about on my blog. It's just too long for a video. But overall, I hope you enjoyed it. I thought it was pretty fun. And because Code Collision has other games like Capture the Flag, I might try this out with a few of them in the future. That's it. Thanks. Bye.